where we think our balances will be at the end of the year with the impacts of COVID-19. Oops, I think I shared the wrong one. Hang on a second. Come back to that later. Here we go. So hopefully this isn't cut off for everybody's screen. I tried to structure it so it's far enough over. And I can zoom it a little bit here. There we go. Okay. So on the revenue side, our expectations remain very similar to what they were at the end of February. We received the funding for the support staff collective agreement expenditures. So what was bargained cost additional funding this year, and we received that funding, as well as receiving our February grant, which was greater than what we had expected, which has resulted in $613,000 in additional revenue, same as before. We're still anticipating quite a shortfall on the international program. Clearly, the borders didn't allow the students that were going to come here for lending them for second semester to have arrived, so our revenues came in quite a bit short. Miscellaneous revenues are coming in about $90,000 over budget. Coming down here a little bit to rentals. We will be looking at what rents we charge for the next couple of months as we have many of our renters not operating currently. So overall, we end up with about $443,000 of revenue beyond what we had budgeted. Moving down to expenditures, we are anticipating being a little bit over budget on, and I say a little bit, I know 67,000 seems like a lot, but on 5.6 million, it's a little bit over budget on principal, vice principal salaries. Teacher salaries are coming in under by about 171 in our projection. Education assistants 136 on 7.4 million. Clerical 159, USW about 177. So there's some funds being generated in those accounts, but I think the big one here is around the casual replacement illness vacation. So we're currently at $2.4 million on that budget, and certainly not spending in the manner that we were for the earlier part of the year. We had projected this being about $600,000 over budget, but the month of April has resulted in almost no casual replacements. And so I've still left a fair bit of room in there, as you can see, between 2.9 and 2.4 to allow for some of the long-term illnesses and the potential restoration of the school system in May or into June, depending on whether or not that happens. So you may consider that to be a bit of contingency, but trying to ensure that we don't over-project a surplus that may change in the event that our operations change later on in the year. Also projecting an increase in our surplus to come from unexpended extracurricular department head in-service budgets. So clearly we're not holding those sessions where we would have pulled staff together outside of their classrooms or their schools to get together and have learning opportunities. So there should be some surplus in those budgets. Now, when there's surpluses in salaries, there tend to also fall in benefits. And because the budgets have turned around so significantly on our casual replacement, they also have benefits. And those budgets have now really turned around to where I'm projecting being $562,000 underspent on our benefit plans for the end of the year. Coming down a bit, I put a bit of a contingency in here because we're close to budget already on travel and professional development, but we certainly have staff that are driving to deliver food and other services and technology. So I put in some funding to take that above where we currently are. I've looked at our 3 insurance claims that we've had this year, which require a deductible that has yet to be paid, which are $10,000 each. So the insurance budget that's currently at $225 should be at about $255 after we pay those deductibles. And then in supplies, we've had to buy some recent technology to service the families that don't have their own, and that has been built into the projection. So overall, I see us potentially overspending on supplies by about $143,000 and services on $9.14 million. And the final item here is the emergent replacement of increasing the amount that we would transfer from operating to capital to look at replacing emergently our call it ancient dump truck. It has reached the end of its life, and we're trying to find a suitable replacement for that now. So after all of that, I'm projecting that the surplus off of our budget would be 1.6 million. We still have $815,000 left over from last year, which would project a year-end surplus of $2,452,000. Bring it back to the group if there's any discussion or questions. I don't hear any. So the next item on the agenda is the budget survey, and I'm not sure if we can, Claire, if you can upgrade Mike here. He has a presentation for sharing.
He'll be right with you.
I've been promoted. Thank you. Thank you all for having me on today to go over the new budget survey for the 2020-2021 budget. We made some changes this year to the way that the budget was structured over the past number of years, more to align with our strategic plan and the hopes of being able to find the community's responses, funding our strategic plan and which areas they thought were most important to do that to. So I'll make a bit of a comparison to last year's budget, but it's not going to be exhaustive just because of the significant change between the structure of last year's budget and the structure of this year's budget. But I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to bring up a little, I'll bring up last year's numbers just to show you for our responses of what we had there. So if you see here, so we have our 2019-2020 annual budget survey. Last year we had 575 respondents. So there are a couple reasons for that. One is that we had changed the nature of the way that we had put the budget out. It was a reporting tool as well as a tool to garner feedback. It was the first year we had done that. We also didn't have COVID, and we had the budget survey up for a bit longer. It was up for a full 2 weeks last year, whereas it didn't quite meet that threshold this year. So the responses you can see were here for last year. Again, this is last year, 575 responses. Definitely parent and guardians were first and foremost in the number of people filling that out, followed closely by staff. So I'll bring you to this year's. I don't know if I close this. No, that stop the sharing. So I'll share the other screen then. Here we go. Okay. So here is the budget survey for this year. And we had a total of 108 respondents. Jason may have told you 109 before. There was one in there for me when I tested it out, so I took that out to not skew the results. So we have 108 survey respondents. This year we see parents, guardian, grandparents still remaining at the forefront of the people who filled out the survey, people who self-identified as that, followed by staff, but a huge increase in our student population, which went from 2% turnout to filling out the survey to 20% turnout. So I attribute that a lot to the work that's been done with our DSAC committee to really engage and transform that group and to be more representative of their students and their colleagues. So yeah, that was really encouraging to see. It was a huge turnout from our students. 20% is significant for even to get 20% to fill out a survey, let alone to get 20% on your staff or on your students there. So we'll continue on to the next, the first question, unless anybody has any questions about that. All right, so if you remember, we designed our survey around our 4 different goals in our strategic plan. So we use the subcontext of those. So this one for question 2, which is our first question, really to get to the meat and potatoes of it. We're trying to develop competent, agile learners who are creative, critical, and social thinkers that have the capacity to be global citizens. We asked our community and our people who were filling out the survey to select 1 or 2 items they thought were the most important on that. So as you can see by the bar graph and the numbers below, we had nearly 65% focusing or asking us to focus on applied learning and authentic real-world learning experiences. That's something, obviously, we know we heard very clearly during our strategic plan process when we had all that engagement. But things like balancing the checkbook, like we have the picture in our strategic plan, the young lady changing the tire, right? So those sorts of experiences. The next one was focusing on foundational learning in literacy and numeracy. So again, a big focus on that, with 55% asking for that as well. The next question was under Indigenous ways of knowing. And so we asked people to select one or two of the following underneath connectedness and relationships to oneself, family, community, and our natural world. Embrace Indigenous perspectives and knowledge as part of our history, and recognize Indigenous content as integral to our learning journey. So far and above was nearly 64% was creating safe, flexible, and culturally responsive learning environments. Next to that was deepening our understanding of environmental stewardship, place-based historical knowledge, language, and culture. But by far, the creating safe and flexible, culturally responsive learning environments was on top of that one. The next question was underneath creating a culture of care and recognize the importance of relationships. So it's fostering healthy, safe, and resilient communities that build on the unique identities of our learners, allowing them to thrive. You can see by the bar graph that this one was actually a little bit closer, and people seem to have a bit of a harder time choosing one or two of the four. But those with over 40% were creating healthy work and school environments that promote wellness, and continuing to create and promote safe and inclusive learning environments for our diverse community. Those were the two, and they were pretty neck and neck, with 43 and 45% responding on those. And the last question from our strategic plan was around our future focused systems. So creating nimble and dynamic environments that embrace change and foster innovation to enhance student learning. And so the two that came out definitely on top of that, one with 60% is all decisions are evidence-based, child-focused, and culturally environmentally responsive. And the next was continuing to enhance the capacity of the system where all members of our organization are committed to our primary purpose of supporting our learners. So those two definitely came out on top of that. We did have a section for comments, of which we received 22 from the community. And I know I've sent this to you. I can go through some, or you can just read them at your leisure, whichever you prefer. And after comments, that actually concludes the survey and the questions we asked to the public. Do you have any questions for me about that? Hearing none, I will go back to being an observer.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mr. Sandquist.
Thank you. So this is really the bulk of the meeting agenda. Right here is the 2020-2021 revised budget position and options. And I'm going to share the screen again and bring up a PowerPoint. Just 1 second. Okay, so I think you can see this. So just starting with our title page. Fortunately, I probably made this a bit so that it cuts off if you have everybody's image on the side. The board have been actively engaging the community to date to collect information and establish priorities for the 2020-2021 budget. And so to date, here's what the board have accomplished. They have established the 2020-21 budget guiding principles, and I'll have those in here later. Considered the priorities of the strategic plan when discussing options to balance the budget. Met individually with each of the partner groups. That concluded yesterday. Issued a survey. I need to correct it now with Mike's correction. We received 108 responses, unless we want to count Mike. Reviewed the budget options with the advisory committee. That happened yesterday. And received information from staff at Board of Education and business committees and the last regular board meeting in relation to the budget. At the last meeting, you received the following information. talked about some of the risk factors associated with COVID-19. We explored the contents of the opening budget position, and we had a list of options at that time for consideration. At this meeting, we will review a revised options list and invite trustees throughout the presentation and at the end for feedback and recommendations. So the principles are here. I'm not going to read them again, but they are ensure that, overall that the budget properly funds the priorities of the strategic plan, is transparent, et cetera. And then of course the legal components, that it complies with the School Act and that it balances and collective agreements, et cetera. These are the 4 strategic priorities of the board: learning, Indigenous ways of knowing, cultural care, and future-focused system. So coming back to risk factors, we do not know how long we'll operate within the context of COVID-19. And many of our budget options make assumptions about those impacts. Our surpluses and balances are not confirmed until the end of the school year, when financial statements are prepared and by staff and presented by the auditors. We typically use modeling based on the current year expenditures to date and past spending patterns, but we know that those old modeling methods don't apply right now. We're not operating in the same manner that we would normally, to know that this is what a typical April looks like. It doesn't look like a typical April or potentially May or June. So we've made sure that in our 1920 year-end projections, we have appropriate contingencies. We are yet to receive all of our extended health benefit premium renewal rates for the year. Those will come when they come. We've asked for them, but we haven't seen them. Teacher bargaining has tentatively concluded, and government tends to fund those new collective agreement conditions based on estimates rather than actual costs. So it will be yet to be seen when that agreement is ratified, if our funding matches or is greater or less than the actual costs of implementing the agreement. So that's still a risk factor, because that agreement, as it hasn't been ratified, has not been included in this budget so far. So some of our budget considerations in a COVID-19 context that we reviewed last time: international student program revenues. We'll show you some revisions that we've made there. Absenteeism replacement budgets, the need for custodial requirements, surplus estimates, investment revenues, enrollment estimates, and staffing levels. So we had this slide last time. I just wanted to bring it back because those are areas that are front of mind as we budget into an unknown context. This might be hard to see. Oops, went too far. But what this slide is for the board, and you have this, and it will go on our website with this presentation, is the breakdown of the number of FTE and the cost for the various work groups that the board employs, as well as the cost of the different benefits and the services and supplies. So that just was a reconciliation in a different way than what you saw last time. Last time you saw it by function and program. Here you see it by actual expenditure type to get to the $88,157,000 that we have in our starting position for operating budget expenditures. So we're beginning with 866.474 staff at a cost of $60,586,641, and then all the various expenditures that go with the operation. I'm going to move from that one. So here's where we're going to walk through some of the differences in the proposals from the last time to work towards a balanced budget. We began with an operating shortfall of $2,163,000. And the last time we brought in an appropriation of surplus into the balancing, we brought in $1.2 million. We believe through some of the savings in some of our targets and grant accounts that surplus will be able to be increased. So we're now talking about bringing in $1,425,000 as prior year surplus to balance. We've made a much more significant reduction in our international student enrollment. So the first draft of this budget was prepared before spring break. And we certainly have had to look at our student enrollment expectations for running that program next year. And we see a significant drop down to potentially 120 students, which is relatively consistent with what we're seeing other districts projecting around the province, about a 40 to 50% drop. We do have some funding that's built up in the International Medical Fund surplus of about $200,000 that we're going to bring in. And so if we did all that, we're still going to be short about $1.3 million. So here's some ways that we can explore reducing that shortfall. And where a number is positive, it reduces that shortfall. So correspondingly, we're looking at a total reduction in the international student program of 847,000. So with the drop in students will come a drop in the number of staff that it will take to support those students. We're looking at closer alignment of teaching levels to the staffing ratios within the collective agreement. So when we restored the teachers' collective, when the Supreme Court of Canada restored the language that's held between the board and the teachers with their collective agreement on class size and compositional language, it set forth a number of ratios which are minimum expectations. And so one of those areas we were quite a bit higher in, and we're looking at aligning closer to that. Also, when we create our budget, we roll over our current staff into the next year and we increment all of our teachers up to their different experience ratings. But we know that we also see a number of people retire or go on leaves throughout the year. So we can assume that we will have a number of retirements this year and they will be replaced by less expensive teachers, allowing us to drop our average teacher salary. So when we do that, we have a positive balance of $695,910, but there's some things that are priorities for the board. And as a negative number comes in here, it means that we're spending that surplus fund. So we had first talked about absenteeism coverage going up by $300,000, and it's really anybody's guess what next year will look like. I'm sure that we will have a high level of absenteeism, but will we have as high a level of replacement costs? That really depends on how we're operating. Certainly now with teachers working remotely, we don't have replacement costs to really to speak of so far. And that's consistent across the other work groups. So as next year rolls out in September, we're unclear how that's going to look, but we think that it makes sense to have a contingency there to increase our absenteeism budget in the event that we need to cover people. The right amount is anybody's guess at this time, but I think it's important to recognize that it won't be the same. We're also looking at increasing the custodial supply budget by 20% to provide for more robust cleaning products to deal with the COVID-19 crisis. Strategic plan activation, we originally had in $150,000, and we still believe this budget will be $150,000, but there are some unexpended funds in the BC Ed plan, which is a grant that the board receives through their operating budget, and they're unexpended this year because we weren't able to do all the things that we had planned on doing in the spring. And so we can roll those funds over to next year and use we can use $75,000 of those funds to support the strategic plan activation, along with $75,000 from the operating grant. So there will still be $150,000 in support of the BC Ed plan, but only half of that will be coming from this operating fund. Looking at a bus mechanic and not knowing how things will start next year, we are considering that we know that there's a need for more mechanical support in the bus garage to support our fleet, but it may not operate at the same level that it is this year. So we're looking at that could be potentially a mid-year start. So we have half a year in there for the bus mechanic, and that's a change from a full year. We've added in support for the tech department. Certainly learning is changing and will likely be changing moving forward into next year. More remote learning is happening now, and that takes a significant amount of support to maintain. Service improvement allocation. This was an item that was bargained with both the CUPE and USW unions, and it was to provide additional services to improve services and, it's obviously services. It's to provide supports for Pro-D and other wage-related benefits that improve the service level for the school district. And so this was a bargained item that we expected would come as a separate grant. And we only learned on April 15th that it was coming in within our funding of our operating grant. But we had to now move it into the operating budget. Putting forth principal, vice principal exempt compensation adjustments that align with all the other staff members. So not anything greater than what the other groups have bargained. And then the final item is supporting moving 3 elementary principals that aren't full-time closer to or to full-time. So these are 0.1 increments for 3 different principals at elementary schools. And after all of those items, this is what the budget would look like. It would be a positive budget of $113. I was going to say 1,000, but we're talking big numbers. No, $113. It's extremely close. So I'm going to stop the share for a moment in case there's any questions from trustees. This is where we'll be stopping on the operating budget and then moving into special purpose funds soon.
Any questions from trustees?
Then I'll go back.
Okay.
Okay, so we're back to the presentation. Hopefully you all see that still. So I'm going to talk about 2 special purpose funds, the classroom enhancement overhead and community link. The special purpose fund is a fund where funds are set aside with a specific purpose. So they come with rules on how they can be expended. You can take operating money and supplement a special purpose fund, but you can't take a special purpose fund and use it to offset operating costs. So the first one to look at is the classroom enhancement fund. I'm going to show you a multi-year comparison of how we've spent these funds for the overhead component. The board will be receiving $877,000 next year in the initial grant announcement, and that is down from the current year. When that means we're not going to be able to do all the things that we did with that fund this year. What we have done in the past is funded all the sick leave for the teachers that are supported, and there's about 76 teachers supported through the regular classroom enhancement fund. There's also provisions in the collective agreement for professional development that have been restored, and so that is also included, and we were able to fund education assistance out of this fund. For 2020-2021, we've recommended that an exempt human resources position be created to support the additional workload associated with remedy reporting and administering a larger workforce. So this is a spreadsheet of how we have spent the funds over the last 3 years. And so it started out at almost 1.2 million. Actually, it started at 400,000 in 2017, 2018, and we got it up to 1.144 million. And at that time, we were able to support a whole bunch of staff from it. We were able to have a half-time clerical funded from the fund, as well as 2 of our custodians that were required for the additional classrooms that were opened. They had to move into the operating budget in 2018, 2019, both of those, but we were still able to support the 10 education assistants along with the leave replacements and in-service requirements for the next 2 years. And so for the next year, 2020, 2021, what we're recommending is that these funds be redistributed to help support the human resources position, to continue to support education assistance, but not at the same level as previously. But there's also a couple of positions that have been added into the operating budget, which you don't see for the increased enrollment for students with designation. So the net effect on education assistance isn't a drop of 4 in this budget; it's closer to 1.5. And then we have the leave replacements in service and Pro-D funds as a way to spend those funds. So this is how we would be recommending the classroom enhancement fund be allocated next year. And I can come back out of this in case there's any questions.
Are there any questions from trustees?
You covered the educational assistance a little bit quickly for me to understand it.
Okay.
It says, large numbers there, but it sounded like it was less so.
Yeah, so what it looks like here is we're going to be dropping by 4 out of this fund. And what I'm saying is that in the operating fund, we're going up by about 2.8. So there's a net effect of how they're funded. The operating fund will support more education assistance than it did in the last year, but this fund will support fewer. But the net is still a drop of about 1.5 when you put the two together.
Yeah, I understand. And the proposed human resources support is how does that fit in our system? Is that a QP position, and is it a new title for a new
It would be a new title. We haven't yet designed it. It would be a junior position to our HR manager and HR officer,
Oh, so
but it would be an exempt position due to its duties.
okay, thank you.
I'm going to move now into Community Link. There is funding next year of $667,000. It has provided supports for school meal programs and other areas that address student needs. Staff were asked to review this fund and have made some recommendations on moving forward. So we are proposing, or staff are proposing consideration of a reduction of the funding for the community school component. And there's a phase out plan there of 1/3 per year for 3 years. There is a proposal to reduce a position in support of the food program. And the reason that has been put in place is to better utilize the funding that we have to support food going to families. And I'll show you how the distribution has been in the past on that. And then the final item is to a plan to, over the years, to add a youth support worker supports plan to add youth support worker supports in future years. So not in this budget, but something that we know that this fund would be well positioned to support.
Could you
So,
give us the rationale around the community schools and a 3-year phased-in process?
Just to allow time for adjustment for the program to find other ways to supplement their operating funding than the school board. That would be why we're proposing a phase time, because we're giving them a lot of notice.
Thank you.
So
Could we be open to phasing that quicker and doing a half and doing 2 over 2 years?
yes, it's the board's budget, and if that is the board's recommendation, that can certainly be built into the budget in regards to the fund.
Thank you.
Yep, those remain recommendations, but the board will ultimately be able to decide how you wish to allocate the funds within this, distribute the funds within this special purpose fund. So we're showing you what a third looks like, which would be to take those funds from 57.5 to 38.833. We're talking about a minor reduction in staffing as we look at how to deliver the food program differently next year. And when you do those two things, you're able to take the food budget from $64,000 to $122,000, essentially double the amount of food that's going to children. You can see that we spend more on people than we do on the actual food. And that's become a bit of a challenge in that the priority is to get the food to those families in need. So this is a balanced proposal on how to spend the Community Link budget. Obviously, there's a lot more line items to it, but we can continue to support social, emotional, and behavioral supports as per last year, support the food program in a greater way than we have in the last 2 years, a little less support on community school, and continue to support the early learning program. I can pop out of that if there's any questions.
Trustees have any questions on that? Yeah, Miss Trustee Croft? Oh, you're muted.
Regarding the community schools, how do we know yet what services would be withdrawn if we cut it by 1/3? What does that look like on the ground?
We would have to have conversations with them to determine what those impacts are.
Thank you.
I'm back to the budget. Moving along to sort of next steps. We've given you, the board, some options to consider for how this budget could be balanced. You've provided some feedback on the special purpose funds already, but may have more feedback on the operating component. The board will meet again In the regular Board Education and Business Committee, this was a special today on April 28th. And at that meeting, we hope that you plan to provide confirmation that the staffing levels in the draft budget are appropriate so that staffing process can begin on April 29th. We hope to have the first and second reading of the budget at the June 2nd board meeting, as the budget is still expected to be adopted by the end of June. And that would allow time for reflection and then be able to hold another meeting to do third and final reading that month. This is a bit of that, last year I called it the celebration slide. In 2002, we were required to change our accounting policy and recognize a $4 million unfunded liability for employee future retirement benefits. So these are the benefits that are attached to our collective agreements that provide for provisions on retirement of sick payout and bonuses of wages. So the celebration here is that the 2019-2020 annual budget that just finished had the final allocation or the final payment of $67,014. So this is the first budget in 18 years which does not hold that debt.
Yay.
That's good news. Yay.
Big celebration. And then I leave with just setting it up for questions, and I'll stop sharing here, but I can come back to any slide if trustees would like me to.
Do you have any questions, trustees? Trustee Spilsbury.
So I know that the Community Link funding was under review. Has the review been completed and these are the results, or yeah?
Yep, those are the results.
And can you just tell us about the process of the review then, please?
Well, it was reviewed with the senior leadership team. So looking at the needs that they see among the district for those funds, and listening to, I believe, the community and board's wish to focus on that food delivery for next year, especially knowing that in a COVID-19 year, we're likely going to have a much higher demand on those food needs. And so I think future years will likely see a youth support worker be recommended. But this year, without too much significant change, we're just trying to get the Community Link budget to the place where it can support food to students as a priority.
Thank you.
Jason, could you remind me how much are we leaving in our contingency fund then with pulling out 1.425?
Yeah, so that leaves in 1,252,000. But you could consider that the increase in absenteeism budget may be a contingency as well. We're unclear what next year looks like around replacement costs. Certainly, if we operate at all similarly at any point next year to as we are today, that cost may not be needed. And also, I've shown you a projection for absenteeism replacement for this year as part of my first presentation that was relatively conservative, not knowing what May and June may look like from an operating standpoint. So we're still left with $500,000 of replacement budget to take us from April 15th to June 30th. And we're not spending any of it right now.
Okay, thank you. Trustee Spilsbury?
Can I just ask, at one point we were talking about moving portables as part of next year. Is that built in, or have we changed our mind?
No, I still think that's going to, sorry, through the chair, I still believe that's required. That will be through the annual facilities grant, but we believe there's 2 portables that need to be relocated next year. We're meeting with the school on Wednesday to discuss the requirements to ensure that those are in fact needed to be relocated. It would be outside of the operating budget. It would be through the annual facilities grant allocation.
Yeah, 80,000.
Any more questions from trustees? Oh, thank you, Jason. That was great. Now we seem to have a question and answer. Okay. Are we to be reading the questions and answers at this point?
Sure. I mean, there's one there.
From QP saying thank you for the budget being supported in this budget. So that's nice. Is there any more business? Being none, can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Trustee DeGroot, seconded by Trustee Spilsbury. All those in favor? Motion
Can't
carried.
see me. I don't know if you can hear me, but my hand is raised.
Thank you, Trustee Thorne. Thank you, Mr. Santos. That was a great presentation.
Yes, thanks, Jason.
Thank you.